Sukumar, I think there is.
I'm muted.
Can you
Yeah,
check
sorry.
if we...
I've got it.
Okay. Okay. Great.
I had forgot to unmute. So thank you for this, for organizing the event, and congratulations, first of all, to the Campaign Against Hate Speech for the successful petitioning of the News Broadcasting Standards Authority on the coverage of the Tablighi Jamaat incident last year. I understand that one of the 4 channels that has been censured has complied with the order. The others, we are not yet sure. And I recently visited the NBSA website to get a copy of the order, and I found it's not yet uploaded. So I think it's very important that we study their order carefully, and we draw all the necessary lessons and principles out of it, because one of the big issues with regulation here is that it's very weakly institutionalized. It's very weak institutional foundations. So what is done today.
Come in here 1 second, Sukumar. Could you switch on your video, or is it just not visible to me? It would be really nice if we could visually also interact. And
I have my video on. My camera's on. I can see my own image.
Sure.
No?
Okay. I just
I think the manager has to unpin Mehtab and whatever.
Sure. Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah. So what I was saying is that the foundations are very weakly institutionalized. That there is a there is a tendency that you will have rulings today which are forgotten tomorrow, and this is not just a feature of self-regulatory bodies. It's a feature of our even of our judicial system, right? Like for instance, 2 days back you had this observation by the Supreme Court that Section 66A of the IT Act, which was held unconstitutional 6 years back, is still being used to book people under, on very vaguely defined offenses. So that is the state at which we are, which makes it very important that we should properly study this ruling and kind of internalize whatever it means in terms of precedent, so that in future, a similar case comes up, we can quote this and say that once you've set these precedents and they're sound and healthy precedents, you should not go back on them. And in fact, if you look at the history of regulation of media, there's a lot of back and forth movement, which is one of its main ailments over the years. So what exactly is that? Is it that we are trying to achieve through regulation? It's very important.
I'm really sorry. I think some of our respondents, as well as we're not able to see your video. Could you possibly switch it off and switch it on again, please?
दिख नहीं रहा उनका।
अभी भी नहीं दिख रहा।
नहीं दिख रहा।
Yeah, my video has a tendency to malfunction.
Yes, now we can see it.
Okay.
Great. Please go on. We're talking about regulation in the sense.
Regulation, yeah. So we went through the weakly institutionalized foundations and so on. So now we are talking about the what is a necessity for regulation, and of course, freedom and regulation are usually regarded as opposites. Now that's a kind of very extreme point of view, which you call the libertarian perspective. And the libertarian perspective today, you'll find is part of the kind of the practice in United States. In the USA, for instance, is where you have the libertarian perspective in free speech being practiced in its most pristine form. And even there has been some debate over it in recent times, as with Donald Trump, when he was in office as president, being kicked off Twitter and Facebook for basically inciting the mass insurrection of January 6th, when he incited people to go and invade the premises of the US Congress rather than admit defeat in the elections. So he's been kicked off. Now he's threatening litigation over that, though nobody really believes that he's going to actually take this to court. But the matter has come up in debate again, and the whole standard of enforcement of hate speech norms in the US. Does this particular case measure up to those norms laid down there? That debate will continue. Of course, in India, we don't quite give very much leeway to the pure libertarian perspective, but freedom of speech, of course, is an integral part of our constitutional guarantees. And the very important point that Dr. Ambedkar, for instance, made in the Constituent Assembly is that there was a case being made by some of the members for a specific guarantee of press freedom, at which Ambedkar responded that there's no need for a separate guarantee for press freedom, that the rights of the press are similar, no less and no more than the rights of all citizens. So the freedom of the press is, in a way, a widely held right of all citizens. Now, why was there need felt for regulation? There's the other kind of reading of the early days of our constitution by various scholars that there was this continuing kind of conflict or contest between freedom, the urge for freedom, and the fear of disorder, because there was firstly, the reality that we had come out of a colonial regime that we needed to kind of, assure ourselves of certain kind of irrevocable freedoms. By the same time, the circumstances in which the freedom was won were turbulent. There was partition, there was a food shortage, there was an insurrection in Telangana, and so there was a need to kind of maintain order also. And of course, the press industry was partly British held, but changed hands soon afterwards, came into the hands of our native capitalists. Of course, and the older nationalist press still kind of continued to flourish, but with the important difference that till then they were sailing in the same boat as the political leadership. Now they began to see themselves as two separate entities within the independent nation state. So one of the first pieces of legislation that the government introduced was something called the Press Objectionable Matter Act, POMA, it was called, POMA, which gave the government powers of seizure and forfeiture over press assets when its clauses were violated. And that caused, of course, a lot of kind of heartburn among the media owners. And soon afterwards, of course, the Press Commission was constituted, which went into the very interesting historical document, which goes into the whole philosophy of the relationship between the media and society, and why is it very important that we should have a sound kind of sound set of principles on which we situate that whole relationship. Briefly put, why do you need regulation? It's about what is the media? What is the media? The media is something that it is how a society talks to itself. It's how a nation talks to itself, and how members of that society talk to each other. And of course, there's always the need to safeguard basic norms of civility in that discourse, because the law cannot be a part of our lives on a day-to-day basis. The law cannot be intruding into our lives on a day-to-day basis and saying, you can say this, you can't say that. That sort of thing is not is beyond the capability of any legal system. And even if it were part of the capacity of a legal system, it would not be a very desirable state of affairs. So you need to have certain norms by which you function on a day-to-day basis. So how do you achieve that that state of equilibrium, of self-regulation? Press Commission was appointed soon afterwards to kind of evolve that, and the Press Commission came up with its proposals, one of which was that there should be a Press Council, which would be a standing body and would have quasi-judicial powers, which would go into this whole function, the kind of day-to-day matters involving the functioning of the press. And at the same time, because of the shadow of this POMA, the Press Objectionable Matter Act, hanging over it, the media industry, the press, I say media industry, but at that time it was just the press, it was just print. The media industry didn't quite cooperate with the Press Council. They kind of resented its creation, and said that this is not how we should be going about our business. In any case, the Press Commission came up with its recommendations, one of which was Press Council. Then there was also the proposal to have a Working Journalists Act to regulate working conditions of journalists, because by then the kind of internal distinctions within the industry were beginning to crystallize out. And by and large, it was understood that the journalists, the working journalists, stood on the side of the government, of progress, the public, whereas the owners were kind of out looking after their own interests, right? So that kind of a difference was beginning to crystallize out. And so you had the Working Journalists Act, and the whole lot of litigation that came out of it. And after a while, because the matter continued to be contentious, the creation of a press council. So in that time, what the media industry did was firstly to set up something called the All India Newspaper Editors Conference, which came up with a code of ethics on how the media should regulate itself. And then, of course, the working journalists formed their own body called the Indian Federation of Working Journalists. Now, both of these are not in very sound shape at this time. In fact, the Newspaper Editors Conference is defunct, has been succeeded by another body called the Editors Guild. IFWJ has gone through several splits since then, and became over time more and more concerned with working conditions and wages rather than with the regulatory issues. They kind of make statements, but they are not very deeply engaged in debates on regulatory issues. So that was the origin of it, and the kind of the thinking that went into it. Now, Press Commission came up with several other concrete recommendations on how regulation could be operationalized. We can come to that later, but what I would like to say before wrapping up is that there is a continuum between the principles that were evolved then and what we see today, because of the changes in the media ecosystem, the technological foundations, and so on. Over time, you had broadcasting coming in as a big player. For a long while, broadcasting was a monopoly of the government. In the 1990s onwards, we started having this cable and satellite television boom, and entry of private players in a completely unregulated system, because the regulatory framework just could not accommodate these. So belatedly, they tried to stitch up some set of rules that that would apply also to broadcasting. And then, of course, they had hardly any time to catch their breath before they were hit by the internet revolution, right? The internet revolution came along, and then, of course, you had the social media revolution, which changed everything, because the earlier media ecosystem was about in some manner it was about one-to-many communication. There was one person or one entity, the newspaper, the news channel, whatever, speaking to many. The other kind of reverse communication was, there was in theory some institutional means for doing that, but it didn't work very much. It didn't matter very much. But in social media, you have situation of many to many, right? Anybody can be on that platform and speak to any number of people. So that caused a complete disorientation and a sense of loss of control for the powers. And of course, I'm sure somebody will take up that story now or later in this session. You have the whole recent effort to bring in very, very kind of rigorous and very almost draconian regulatory regime for digital media and social media. So, so maybe at some time we can connect those dots between these events. But right now, I think I should hand back to the chair because I've spoken a lot already. So, Mehtab.
Thank you, Sukumar. I think that was useful. And here, if I can request Dhanya to basically, if you can, Dhanya, if you can connect the dots which Sukumar was referring to, especially your experience of working in TV, and now with a digital organization, leading a digital organization, and also leading a digital Digipub. So if you can, and also briefly, if you can also briefly talk about the new IT rules and why Digipub and other organizations are opposing it, whether you are totally against the idea of regulation, or you want some kind of self-regulation like NBSA and TV channels. So it would be good if you can say uh, talk about that.
Hi. Thank you, Mehta. So, first, I would like to say is that though television, I'm not talking about print here, though television does have a code of ethics under which it is supposed to function, a code of rules, and digital actually does not have it. Having worked both in digital and television almost for the same amount of time, I worked in TV for 8 years and digital for 7 years now. I feel at least the mainstream digital media sites, though they don't have a written code of rules, function way more ethical than television channels. And I mean television channels in most languages, except perhaps the exceptions like Malayalam and Tamil. Hindi, English, Kannada, most of them, I don't think even look at the code of ethics or they care about the code of ethics. I'm not talking about all channels per se, but a lot of them. Now, as far as digital is concerned, see, unlike print or television, no, we do not have a code of ethics, as in which is written by a particular body. So I'm all for self-regulation. Now, the question that a lot of people ask us is that if there is no code of ethics for digital, how do you function? How are you held accountable? See, first thing is that digital media sites do not function in a vacuum. We are accountable to every, and we are subject to every Indian law, including laws of defamation, hate speech, sedition, whatever the laws are. We of course can be booked for FIRs, complaints, etc. So we abide by these laws. I mean, all of these laws are applicable to us. So we don't function in a vacuum. But like Sukumar was saying, that law alone cannot be the solution. Like, if someone, is my video not
No, Dhanya, can you switch it on, please?
Video static. I
Yes.
mean, the
Image is your image.
Yeah.
now?
Yes. Now we can see.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know why, because I can see myself otherwise. Yeah, okay. So what I want to say is that, like Sukumar was saying, that law cannot be the only solution, right? Just the fear of defamation or the fear that someone would sue you cannot be how journalism organizations are run. Therefore, what we need is self-regulation. Now, Digipub is trying to write a code of ethics which will be applicable to all our members. Even then, of course, we cannot say mandatorily you have to follow it. But if people do complain to us, then we will decide as to what can be done if a member does not follow the code of ethics. So that's something we are trying to do. What we are against is the government trying to bring the IT rules for many reasons. I mean, in fact, I'm part of the hate speech beta group, and we had a meeting, not hate speech beta meeting, but we did have a meeting, I think around 3 or 4 months ago in Bengaluru. We spoke about the IT rules at length. But if there were people who are not part of that meeting, to quickly explain what our main problems are, first thing is that the IT rules have been put together in a hurry simply because the government wanted to bring OTT platforms, social media platforms, and digital media websites under one umbrella. Now, IT rules are mainly for intermediaries, which are sites which use the internet or which are intermediaries basically, and news websites are not intermediaries. That is our first problem with the IT rules. How are you classifying us as intermediaries when what we do is journalism, like a print media, like the print or the television media does. So first thing, we have opposed the very definition of intermediaries and how we have been clubbed along with the others and defined as an intermediary. Second, of course, is the whole way the grievance system works. There are three tiers in the grievance system where someone can send grievances to a news organization. If they are not happy, then they go to a self-regulatory committee, which can have a former judge and other experts. The third level is, of course, the interdepartmental committee, which has bureaucrats from various departments of the union government. The fourth is the emergency powers, which the secretary of the INB department has, wherein the secretary can decide whether to block a website if it is against the national interest, etc. So this whole grievance system itself is basically to weaponize grievances. Now, I will tell you one small thing that we had to go through, I think 1 month ago. Many of you must be aware of Narendra Nayak, the rationalist who's based out of Karnataka. We had done an interview with him on certain claims by Ayurveda and Ayush on coronavirus. And in that interview, he had mentioned the death of an Ayurvedic doctor. I think that Ayurvedic doctor died due to COVID-19. We get around 35 grievances to our grievance officer. Each grievance is about the same interview, but written in a different way. Now, what this new IT rule tells us is that we have to reply to each of these 35 people and explain to them why we are right. And then if they are not happy with it, they can go to the self-regulatory committee. Now, imagine we got 30. Now, all these 35 people are not telling us the same question, or they're also intelligent. They are not actually opposing one particular part of the interview. Each of them have a different problem. It's obviously a collective effort, but they have also done it very intelligently. They have sent us different opposition to the same interview, and we have to actually sit and explain to each one of them. Now, imagine today it's 35. Tomorrow, a political party decides they don't like some article. They tell 350 people to send me grievances. The next day, it becomes 3,500 people sending grievances. We actually have to sit and reply to all these people. If they are not happy, they can go to any of the other committees and finally to the government. We're supposed to keep a record of all this and then publish monthly reports. Running small organizations, how is it even possible for people to do it? And clearly, this is weaponizing grievances, which is what the government is trying to do. And what we are saying is that the powers which have been given to bureaucrats is ultra vires what is mandated by the Indian Constitution, and that the government is clearly trying to make sure that they bypass the parliament. Now, for example, any code of ethics which is applicable to print or television in India has got parliament sanction. But when it comes to digital, the government did not want that parliament sanction, which is why they made this amendment to the IT rules. So this is the main problem that we have. So then people ask me, you guys don't want the government to bring in any sort of regulation. Then how are you going to be controlled? The whole point is that media has to be self-regulated. There is no other way out. That has to be at different levels. It can be within media organizations. It can be Digipub-like organizations which bring in some sort of self-regulation. But governments have no role to play in regulation, which I think, and all of us have to understand. Even now, look at what hate speech Beda has done. You all got three orders. One is on News 18, one is on Times Now, and the other one on Suvarna. All these are news channels which apparently have a code of ethics and are supposed to function according to the code of ethics. And what they do every day, I mean, the complaint by hate speech Beda was about one particular show on Times Now, one particular show on News 18. I think Suvarna or News 18, there were a couple of shows that you objected to, or couple of, or one or two shows at least that you objected to. But this happens on a daily basis on these channels. And how many people, including hate speech Beda, how many days, how many hours can we sit and monitor what they're doing? So the point is, code of ethics by the government can be on one side. The whole point here is that when it comes to TV, the government is not interested in actually doing anything, because the hate speech that they propagate helps the government. But when it comes to digital, simply because most digital media in India now opt to speak truth to the government, they want to bring some law to ensure that they can threaten us, intimidate us in some way or the other. Yeah, Mehta?
So if I can ask a question here, that self-regulatory organizations like say NBSA, what we have seen over a period of time, in many cases, NBSA will pass a order, say, but they are not followed by the members of the say or the owners of the TV channels. In fact, they have gone ahead and formed their own NBSA kind of thing. Especially, I mean, we know that Arnab Goswami, when he was his channel was ordered, he formed a new organization. Similarly, in India TV also in the past does the same thing. Aaj Tak defied to follow the rules. So in that case, how self-regulation is going to work? I mean, that is a question.
No, see, Mehtab, nothing is foolproof. Like you said, Arnab Goswami made some other organization for broadcasters. But I think some new development has happened where he's come back to NBSA or he's combined. I'm not very sure. Anyways, that's not the point. Arnab Goswami does not run merely an association for broadcasting channels. He also started along with OP India, I think a few other websites. They have a association for websites also. So there are two associations which he runs. And imagine if someone sends a complaint to them, that association is supposed to take some action, right? So the question really is now, for example, Suvarna, News 18 and Times Now have been given some sort of punishment by the NBSA, including censure for Times Now. Now, will they put that apology? Will they not put that apology? That is secondary. But the point is, hate speech beta was able to get that order, which in itself is good. And I feel that because I think two of the channels were asked to pay fines, that will be a deterrent. So I believe that the only deterrent can be de-incentivization. Now you can have self-regulation, you can have self-censorship, you can have editorial standards. Most news organizations have their own editorial policy. They know what they will cover, what they will not cover, and many times they don't follow their own rules. That's the whole problem here. Now, what happens when you have rules for self-regulation, you have self-censoring, or you have your own editorial policies, but still you resort to hate speech? There, I believe the only solution really is for elements outside the media, which is organizations, associations like Hate Speech Beta, like civilians, to come forward and do something to de-incentivize. This is a very new thing. It has started only the last few years in America and all that, but I've seen News Laundry doing it quite a bit in India. Basically, if say Republic, I think they did with Republic once, they chose hate speech on Republic and they asked advertisers, why are you not pulling out? That's one way to de-incentivize, that you ask the advertiser. In fact, I think that should also be the next step for Hate Speech Beta, that you start disincentivizing hate speech. Second, of course, is get them penalized financially. The two orders against Suvarna and News 18 Kannada, there has been some fine imposed on them, which I think will be impactful, will be effective, and will also make them self-censor, right? So in one way, that's good. I mean, that's the only way we can really curb hate speech. I'm going back to hate speech because the topic is also about that.
Good you spoke about this stop funding the hate part, because I was going to ask that, because News Laundry did against Times Now, Republic, but also Sudarshan TV.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember who they did against, but they did do.
And so that's the way. जयशंकर जी, अगर मैं आपकी तरफ आऊं और ये आपसे पूछूं, आप प्रेस काउंसिल से भी जुड़े रहे हैं, प्रेस एसोसिएशन से भी जुड़े हुए हैं. प्रेस काउंसिल का जो मैंडेट है वो बहुत लिमिटेड है, सिर्फ प्रिंट मीडिया तक महदूद है. और जबकि अब मीडिया हम देखें तो डिजिटल भी है, सोशल मीडिया भी है और टीवी भी है, ये सारी चीज़ें हैं. तो इसमें और रेगुलेशन इम्पॉर्टेंट है, इससे किसी को इनकार नहीं कर सकते हम. तो आपका जो एक्सपीरियंस रहा है उसको आप कैसे देखते हैं? और एक चीज़ और कि एक बीच में बात चली थी कि प्रेस काउंसिल को मीडिया काउंसिल में कन्वर्ट करना चाहिए, उसको आगे ले जाना चाहिए. तो उसके बारे में प्रेस काउंसिल के अंदर क्या बातचीत रही और क्यों मीडिया काउंसिल, तो इस पे भी थोड़ा अगर आप बात करें.
शुक्रिया मेहताब। तो अभी सुकुमार ने और धन्या ने काफी कुछ बता दिया है इसके बारे में। सो देखिए, प्रेस काउंसिल जब बनी थी 1966 में, उस समय इलेक्ट्रॉनिक चैनल्स, टीवी चैनल्स या डिजिटल मीडिया कहीं कुछ था नहीं, तो इसलिए उस समय प्रिंट मीडिया के लिए ही इसको बनाया गया था बेसिकली। और अपने ढंग से काम करती रही प्रेस काउंसिल। उस समय तो जिस ढंग का माहौल था उसको देखते हुए इमरजेंसी में एक बार ऐसा भी दौर आया जब प्रेस काउंसिल को भंग कर दिया था समय की सरकार ने, और बाद में फिर रिवाइवल हुआ उसका। तो उसके बाद से प्रेस काउंसिल अपने ढंग से काम कर रही है। ये प्रपोजल अभी आया है कि चूंकि एक्सपेंशन बहुत हुआ है इलेक्ट्रॉनिक मीडिया का या डिजिटल मीडिया का या सोशल मीडिया का, तो इसको भी रेगुलेट करने के लिए किसी न किसी तरह से एक मैकेनिज्म बनना चाहिए। तो एक प्रपोजल ये आया था कि मीडिया काउंसिल के नाम से बनाया जाए, जिसमें ये सारे जितने मीडिया जितने तरह के हैं उनको भी शामिल किया जाए। और ये प्रपोजल हमारे यहाँ प्रेस काउंसिल में भी आया था। प्रेस काउंसिल में हालांकि बहुत सारे लोगों की राय थी कि साहब प्रेस काउंसिल के ही अंडर लाना चाहिए सारे मीडिया को, चाहे ये इलेक्ट्रॉनिक टीवी चैनल्स हैं या डिजिटल मीडिया है या सोशल मीडिया है। लेकिन इस तरह का एक प्रपोजल इन्होंने बना करके एक रिजोल्यूशन करके प्रेस काउंसिल ने गवर्नमेंट को भेज भी दिया। अभी गवर्नमेंट उस पर विचार कर रही होगी, पता नहीं, अभी तक तो कुछ आया नहीं है। तो बेसिक बात यही है कि प्रेस काउंसिल के अंडर हो या मीडिया काउंसिल बने जिसमें सारे लोगों को समायोजित किया जा सके। अब प्रेस काउंसिल का काम जो है, मतलब देखिए सीधी सी बात है, अभी मैं सुन रहा था, तो प्रेस काउंसिल और ये जो अपना एनबीएसए है या एनबीए है जो भी है, ये एक तरह का टीचलेस बॉडीज हैं। मतलब एक ऑर्नामेंटल बॉडीज कहा जाए तो ज्यादा अच्छा है, क्योंकि बहुत कुछ इनके पास पावर्स नहीं है, बहुत कुछ इनके पास वो नहीं है जिसके कुछ कर सकते हैं। प्रेस काउंसिल है, किसी अखबार ने अगर कुछ गलत खबर छाप दी है या फेक न्यूज चला दी है या कहीं उसके बारे में शिकायतें हुई हैं, तो उस पर सुनवाई करेगी। हमारे यहाँ जो जांच समितियां हैं, 2 तरह की जांच समितियां होती है, जांच समिति 1 और 2, उसके अंदर मामला जाएगा, वो सुनवाई करेगी, उन लोगों को बुलाएगी, वो आएंगे, अपना अपना पक्ष रखेंगे, और उसके बाद प्रेस काउंसिल का जो फैसला होगा वो मैक्सिमम हम कर सकते हैं कि 6 महीने के लिए उसको सेंसर कर देंगे, ताकि 6 महीने अगर तक सरकार का कोई भी विज्ञापन उसको नहीं मिलेगा, ये कर सकते हैं। या गवर्नमेंट को भी सेंसर कर सकते हैं, गवर्नमेंट होगी या गवर्नमेंट ऑफिसर्स होंगे। तो बेसिक यही था कि प्रेस फ्रीडम को इंश्योर करने के लिए और उसके साथ ही रिस्पॉन्सिबल जर्नलिज्म को भी प्रोत्साहित करने के लिए प्रेस काउंसिल का गठन हुआ। अब आते हैं हम जब इलेक्ट्रॉनिक चैनल्स के बारे में या ये अपना डिजिटल मीडिया और सोशल मीडिया के लिए, तो खास तौर से इसका बेस पूरा का पूरा जब एक तैयार हुआ, तो अब जैसे मान लीजिए टीवी चैनल्स वाले हैं, तो उनका मेन थ्रस्ट होता है कि हमारी टीआरपी कैसे बढ़ेगी, क्या हम ऐसा दिखाएंगे जिसको लेकर के टीआरपी ज्यादा बढ़ सकती है। तो पहले तो एक जमाना था जब कभी वो एक राजू श्रीवास्तव मिमिक्री करता था, वो आता था, कभी राखी सावंत आ जाती थी, और कभी ये रामदेव जो अपना योग का खेल लेकर के आता था, तो इससे लोगों की टीआरपी बढ़ जाती थी। लेकिन ये 3 आर थे उस समय। बाद में हो गया कि साहब अब ये भी उतने टिकाऊ नहीं रह गए माल, तो फिर हेट का माहौल बनाया जाए। सबसे बड़ा आज की तारीख में जो बिकने का सामान है हमारे मीडिया के लिए, वो नफरत का बाजार है, हेट स्पीचेज हैं। उसको देख इतना, मतलब जब भी टीआरपी जिसकी गिरनी शुरू हो जाती है, तो हिंदू मुसलमान, भारत पाकिस्तान, मंदिर मस्जिद, लव जिहाद, इस तरह के इशूज को सामने ला करके खड़ा कर देते हैं। उस पर 4 लोगों को बुला लेंगे, कुछ दाढ़ी वालों को बुला लेंगे, कुछ जटाधारियों को बुला लेंगे, और पता नहीं उनके धर्म से उनका सैंक्शन है कि नहीं है, लेकिन वो लोग इस तरह की बातें करेंगे जिससे झगड़े फसाद हो, नफरत बढ़े, और इनकी टीआरपी खड़ी होती रहती है। तो बेसिक तो ये था। अब जैसे मैंने कहा कि अभी बीच में आपने भी चर्चा की थी मेहताब की एनबीएसए की बात जो है, बहुत पहले जब इंडिया टीवी के बारे में एनबीएसए ने फैसला किया था, एनबीएसए के चेयरमैन भी सुप्रीम कोर्ट के रिटायर्ड जज हैं, अभी ए.के. सीकरी साहब है उस समय। तो उस जब फैसला किया था कि साहब एक गलत खबर दिखा दी थी इंडिया टीवी ने, किसी महिला का इंटरव्यू दिखा दिया जो कि इंटरव्यू हुआ नहीं था, और उस पर 5 लाख रुपए का जुर्माना लगाया था। पता लगा कि रजत शर्मा जी ने एनबीए की मेंबरशिप छोड़ दी। अब वो एनबीए के मेंबर ही नहीं रह गए तो आप उनसे जुर्माना कैसे वसूल करेंगे? और आज देखिए, आज एनबीए के चेयरमैन रजत शर्मा जी ही बैठे हुए हैं। इसी तरह से जी न्यूज के बारे में जो आया था, एनबीए से का ऑर्डर हुआ था कि उनको अपने प्राइम टाइम शो में माफी मांगना पड़ेगा। लोग इंतजार करते रहे, हम लोग भी इंतजार करते रहे कि अब आएंगे सुधीर चौधरी, अब आएंगे, अब माफी मांगेंगे, लेकिन वो माफीनामा हुआ नहीं। तो अगर नहीं हुआ तो फिर एनबीएसए के पास क्या अथॉरिटी है कि उस पर क्या एक्शन ले सकता है, नहीं ले सकता है? एनबीए की मेंबरशिप मैंडेटरी होगी कि नहीं होगी, या एनबीएसए का जो ऑर्डर होगा, फैसला होगा, वो अमल करना उस पर मैंडेटरी होगा कि नहीं होगा, ये देखने वाली बात है, क्योंकि उसका कुछ हुआ नहीं उसके आगे। और वही आदमी कल छोड़ देगा, फिर बाद में उसका चेयरमैन भी बन जाएगा, फिर उसका मेंबर भी बन जाएगा। तो ये सब चीजें देखने वाली चीजें हैं। बल्कि बीच में गवर्नमेंट ने एक समिति भी बनाने की बात की थी, 10 मेंबर को शामिल करके, उसमें एनबीएसए के भी था, प्रेस काउंसिल का भी मेंबर लेकर के, जो ये सोशल मीडिया और ये फेक न्यूज वगैरह सब देखभाल करने के लिए उन्होंने एक समिति बनाने की घोषणा की थी। अभी तक पता नहीं वो समिति पूरी तरह से गठित हो पाएगी नहीं, और उसका क्या काम हुआ इसके बारे में भी कुछ अभी तक पता नहीं चल पाया है। और दूसरी बात यह है कि जो ये सोशल मीडिया है, ये इसके सकारात्मक पहलू भी हैं, पॉजिटिव एस्पेक्ट्स भी हैं और निगेटिव एस्पेक्ट्स भी हैं। पॉजिटिव ये है कि जिस ढंग से मेन मीडिया हमारा आज का है, जो मेन टीवी चैनल्स हैं, वो जो जन सरोकार से जुड़े हुए मुद्दे हैं उनको ये दिखाते नहीं हैं, उनको ये उस पर कभी चर्चा भी नहीं करते हैं, और ऐसे ऐसे इश्यूज उठा लेते हैं जिसपे उनका कोई मतलब नहीं होता है। तो उसको सोशल मीडिया पे लोगों को अपने अपने वीडियो चैनल बना करके, अपने अपने जो ब्लॉग्स बना करके लोगों ने अपना अपना शुरू कर दिया है। तो उस पर सेंसर भी नहीं होता, जो हम कहते हैं, जो हम लिखते हैं, जो वही दिखाते हैं, वही सुनाते हैं लोग। लेकिन इसके लिए एक बात और भी है कि कोई जवाबदेही नहीं होती है, कोई रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी किसी की नहीं होती है। हम जो चाहे सो दिखा देते हैं, बाद में होगा अगर कहीं शिकायत आएगी तो हम उसको विड्रा कर लेंगे, कोई ट्वीट कर देगा और उसको लेकर के देश भर में कुछ माहौल ऐसा गर्म हो जाएगा, कम्युनल टेंशन बढ़ जाएगा। जब शिकायत होगी तो उस ट्वीट को हम हटा लेंगे। लेकिन ट्वीट तो आपने हटा लिया, उस समय तो उससे पहले ट्वीट जो है नफरत का माहौल बनाने में तो अपनी भूमिका अदा कर ली थी, उस पर तो कोई एक्शन हुआ नहीं। कहीं ना कहीं किसी लेवल पे जरूर ये सेल्फ रेगुलेशन तो होना ही चाहिए, और रेगुलेटरी बॉडी भी अगर हो, रेगुलेटरी बॉडी अगर उसको कहे, एक रेगुलेशन बने, तो एक उसकी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी जब तक इंश्योर नहीं होगी तब तक तो बात बनेगी नहीं। और देखिए, शुरू से जैसे पहले की बात आप लोग कर रहे थे ना, तो अतीत से लेकर के आज तक पहले क्या होता था कि संपादक की सत्ता बहुत महत्वपूर्ण होती थी, चाहे वो अखबार में हो, उसमें टीवी चैनल तो था ही नहीं, तो अखबार पत्र पत्रिकाओं में जो संपादक की जो एक संस्था होती थी वो काफी महत्वपूर्ण होती थी और वो देखती थी सारी चीजों को। आपको याद होगा कि उस समय जो सभी अखबारों में लेटर्स टू एडिटर होते थे, और वो काफी हमको हम लोग तो लेटर टू एडिटर लिख लिख करके पत्रकार बन गए। दिनमान पत्रिका में उस समय हम लोग पत्र लिखते थे, तो वो एक बड़ा जरिया होता था। कभी किसी की शिकायत करनी हुई, कभी किसी खबर को लेकर के कुछ हुआ हो, तो वो धीरे धीरे खत्म हो गया। संपादक की संस्था भी खत्म हो गई और संपादक के नाम पत्र लेटर टू एडिटर जो है वो भी धीरे धीरे खत्म ही हो गया। आप किसी अखबार में आप देखिए तो मुश्किल से 2-4 पत्र कभी छप जाते होंगे, वो भी प्रशस्ति भाव के, जो प्रशंसा करने वाले पत्र होंगे वही होंगे। तो अच्छा, उसके अलावा फिर बाद में अगर संपादक के नाम पत्र से बात नहीं बनती थी तो प्रेस काउंसिल में जाते थे, नहीं तो फिर अदालत में भी चले जाते थे। अभी ऐसा कोई मैकेनिज्म दिखाई नहीं दे रहा है, खासतौर से डिजिटल मीडिया के लिए या सोशल मीडिया के लिए। ये कानून तो बनाया है, अब कानून इसलिए बनाया है कि चूंकि जो सोशल मीडिया या जो डिजिटल मीडिया आपको आपके चुनाव में बहुत फायदा पहुंचा सकता था या पहुंचाया था 2014 के चुनाव में या 2019 के चुनाव में, अब धीरे धीरे आपके खिलाफ सक्रिय हो रहा है। तो इसलिए अब एक आप कानून बना रहे हैं, इसलिए आप कर रहे हैं ताकि उसको अपने अंदर दबा करके रखा जाए। उसके पीछे ये नहीं है कि कोई फ्री एंड फेयर जर्नलिज्म को इंश्योर करने की कोई बात हो या रिस्पॉन्सिबल जर्नलिज्म को इंश्योर करने की बात हो, क्योंकि यही जो मीडिया हमारा था जब 2014 के चुनाव से पहले। आपको याद होगा कि जिस तरह से या उसके बाद के जितने चुनाव हुए, अब मुजफ्फरनगर के दंगे में जो सोशल मीडिया का जो हमारा रोल था या हमारे टीवी चैनल्स का भी जो रोल था, कितना था कि मतलब अफगानिस्तान के वीडियो फुटेज लगा करके दिखा दिया गया कि साहब ये इस तरह से घटनाएं हो रही हैं, मुजफ्फरनगर में हो रही हैं। या अब आप देखिए, जैसे एक बड़ी घटना हुई थी कठुआ में, जम्मू में एक मंदिर के अंदर एक बच्ची के साथ बलात्कार हुआ था, उसकी हत्या कर दी गई थी, बहुत नृशंस हत्या हुई। लेकिन हमारा जो एक अखबार है, हिंदी का अखबार है, जिसको यूनिवर्स का सबसे बड़ा हिंदी अखबार कहते हैं, उसने बैनर खबर छाप दी कि कठुआ में बच्ची के साथ बलात्कार नहीं हुआ। अब दुर्भाग्य की बात है कि उसके बाद में जब फैसला हो गया, उस सीबीआई ने केस कर दिया, वो लोग पकड़े गए, तो उसी अखबार ने फिर वो भी खबर छापी, लेकिन उस खबर के साथ ये माफी नहीं मांगा कि नहीं हमने ये गलत फ्रंट पेज पे जो बड़ी खबर लगा दी थी वो गलत खबर थी, इसके बारे में कभी नहीं कहा। तो इस तरह की घटनाएं भी हो रही हैं। इसको भी प्रेस काउंसिल ने सो मोटो लिया था। जैसे हमारे यहाँ प्रेस काउंसिल का काम करने का जो ढर्रा है, एक तो लोग शिकायतें भेजते हैं अपनी, उस पर होता है, या फिर प्रेस काउंसिल खुद ही कुछ मामलों की जो सो मोटो कॉग्निजेंस लेकर के उस पर सुनवाई करती है, उसके लिए समन करती है लोगों को। तो ये बना हुआ है। तो इस तरह से अगर हम देखें तो चाहे प्रिंट का माहौल हो, चाहे इलेक्ट्रॉनिक चैनल्स का हो। अब आप देखिए, अभी हाल की घटना को देखिए, पश्चिम बंगाल में चुनाव हुआ। चुनाव के बाद कुछ जगहों पे हिंसक वारदातें भी हुई, बंगाल में पहले भी होता ही रहा है। एक इसको लेकर के आज तक हमारा मीडिया लगातार खबरें छापता है, खबरें दिखाता है और बताता है कि साहब ये हुआ, ये हुआ। लेकिन उत्तर प्रदेश में अभी जो जिला पंचायतों के चुनाव हुए हैं, ब्लॉक प्रमुखों के चुनाव हुए हैं, जिस तरह से महिलाओं को जबरदस्ती घसीटा गया है, उनके कपड़े फाड़े गए हैं, एक पुलिस अधिकारी के ऊपर थप्पड़ मार दिया गया है, ये सारी चीजें, इस पर कभी हमारा इलेक्ट्रॉनिक चैनल्स जो मीडिया है, ये मेन मीडिया जो है, उस पर कभी चर्चा होती नहीं है। तो बंगाल पे हमारा रुख कुछ और हो जाता है और उत्तर प्रदेश पे कुछ और रवैया हो जाता है। इसके पहले अब त्रिपुरा में विधानसभा का चुनाव हुआ था, उसके बाद पोस्ट इलेक्शन वायलेंस जो हुए थे, उसके बारे में हमारे किसी भी टीवी चैनल पे डिस्कशन नहीं हुआ। आज जो ये देश फेस कर रहा है, देश के लोग फेस कर रहे हैं, कोरोना काल में जितने लोगों के की नौकरियां गई हैं, जितने लोगों की मौत हुई है, जितने लोग बेरोजगार हुए हैं, महंगाई जिस तरह से चरम पे पहुंच गई है, पेट्रोलियम पदार्थों के दाम लगातार बढ़ रहे हैं, इस पर किसी भी टीवी चैनल पे आपने कोई डिस्कशन देखा हो तो बताइए। तो जो जन सरोकार वाले इश्यूज हैं, जो पब्लिक से जुड़े हुए मुद्दे हैं, उन पे हमारा मीडिया कभी चर्चा नहीं करता है। और उस तरह की चीजों को, जैसे हेट, जैसे नफरत का माहौल बढ़े, नफरत का बाजार बढ़े, उस खबरों को ज्यादा ये लोग प्रोमिनेंटली दिखाते हैं। अब मुश्किल यही है कि सरकार अगर उस पर रेगुलेशन के लिए करती है तो उसका उद्देश्य ये नहीं कि हेट स्पीचेस बंद हो जाए या उसका ये हो, हमारे खिलाफ इसका इस्तेमाल सोशल मीडिया का न होने पाए या डिजिटल मीडिया का न होने पाए, तो इसके लिए इस तरह के कानून बनाते हैं। अब सोचिए, उत्तर प्रदेश के हाथरस में एक दलित बच्ची के साथ बलात्कार हुआ, पुलिस ने उसको बिना उसके घर वालों की सहमति से जला दिया, उसका दाह संस्कार कर दिया। अब उस खबर को कवर करने के लिए केरल के एक जर्नलिस्ट सिद्दीक कप्पन जा रहे थे, उनको रास्ते में गिरफ्तार कर लिया और गिरफ्तार करके उनको यूएपीए में बंद कर दिया। आज तक वो जेल में है। तो अब ये सारी चीजें भी चल रही हैं। तो अब सवाल है कि सरकार का रवैया क्या है, सरकार की सोच क्या है। एक तरह का अदृश्य जो, जिसको मतलब दिखाई ना दे। इमरजेंसी में तो एक था कि सेंसरशिप थी, लेकिन इस समय सेंसरशिप से भी ज्यादा भयंकर है, लेकिन कहने के लिए नहीं है कि सेंसरशिप है। तो एक माहौल ये बनाया गया है। तो बेसिक चीज यही है कि आज की तारीख में हमारा प्रेस या फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच, फ्रीडम ऑफ एक्सप्रेशन को इंश्योर कैसे किया जाए, लेकिन उसके साथ उसको रिस्पॉन्सिबल कैसे किया जाए। क्योंकि जितने भी मामले होते हैं, जब भी होता है, अब आप देखिए जैसे बंबई में हुआ था।
जयशंकर जी, अगर मैं यहाँ पर आपको थोड़ा रोकूं, तो एक सवाल जो थोड़ा मैं पूछना चाहता था आपसे, और फिर एक सवाल तीनों लोगों से है। ये सवाल मैं पूछना चाहता था कि देखिए, सेल्फ रेगुलेटरी जो बॉडीज हैं वो अपने ऑर्डर्स को इम्प्लीमेंट नहीं कर पाती है, ये हम लगातार देख रहे हैं। लेकिन हमको ये भी देखने को मिला है, जो स्टैट्यूटरी बॉडी है, मतलब प्रेस काउंसिल जैसी, वो एक तो ये हम देखते हैं कि सेलेक्टिव होती है। मतलब जैसे आपने दैनिक जागरण का नाम लिए बिना जिक्र किया, हाँ, तो दैनिक जागरण के खिलाफ उस तरह की कार्रवाई नहीं होती है, लेकिन टेलीग्राफ के खिलाफ और दूसरे जो जो एंटी एस्टेब्लिशमेंट न्यूज़पेपर समझे जाते हैं उनके खिलाफ तुरंत तुरंत कार्रवाई हो जाती है। तो ये एक बड़ी मतलब अपने आप में समस्या है कि अगर कोई सेल्फ रेगुलेशन इनसफिशिएंट है, तो अगर स्टैट्यूटरी बॉडी बनाई जाए तो क्या वो पॉलिटिकल टूल नहीं बनेगा, ये अपने आप में सवाल है। और एक सवाल जो तीनों लोगों से है, तो क्वेश्चन आई मीन सेवरल ऑफ अस wanted to ask that how can we make self-regulatory bodies more useful, and so that they can enforce their orders, their judgments on their members and the say media organizations. So ये दो सवाल है. These are two questions. तो अगर आप briefly जयशंकर जी briefly अगर बताएं तो फिर उसके बाद.
नहीं, आप ठीक कह रहे हैं कि सेल्फ रेगुलेटरी बॉडीज को एक तो जिस ढंग की ऑटोनॉमी चाहिए उनको उस ढंग की ऑटोनॉमी नहीं है, और उसके पास वो पावर्स भी नहीं है. मतलब प्रेस काउंसिल या इस तरह के, जैसे मैंने अभी एनबीसी का भी जिक्र किया था, उनके पास एक्सिक्यूटिव पावर्स जो है जब तक नहीं होंगे, जब तक कुछ नहीं कर पाएंगे. और फिर दूसरा उसका स्ट्रक्चर जो होगा, जिस ढंग का स्ट्रक्चर होगा. अब स्ट्रक्चर जो आप प्रेस काउंसिल का अगर स्ट्रक्चर आप देखेंगे, उसमें कैसे कैसे लोग, कौन कौन लोग कैसे आते हैं, तो अपने आप में एक अलग सब्जेक्ट हो जाता है. जैसे अब सरकार के 5 नुमाइंदे होंगे जो सांसद होंगे, 2 राज्यसभा से 3 लोकसभा से होंगे, ये प्रेस काउंसिल में होंगे. उसके अलावा फिर आप यूजीसी का एक नुमाइंदा होगा, साहित्य अकादमी का एक नुमाइंदा होगा, बार काउंसिल ऑफ इंडिया का होगा, फिर अखबारों में है तो एडिटर्स का होगा, फिर वो उनके मालिक जो है वो छोटे अखबार बड़े अखबार उनके होंगे, फिर नॉन वर्किंग जर्नलिस्ट का होगा, अदर देन एडिटर. मतलब तमाम तरह के जो कुल मिला करके 28 मेंबर्स चुने जाते हैं. और उसमें भी बहुत सारे लोग हैं जो लगातार आते ही रहते हैं. उसमें उनका बहुत ज्यादा रुचि जो है वो प्रेस फ्रीडम या प्रेस रेस्पॉन्सिबल प्रेस के बजाय कुछ और कारणों में होता है. या कभी उनके विज्ञापन को लेकर के चिंता हो जाएगी कि अखबार को, बल्कि उन्हीं के अखबार को विज्ञापन मिल रहा है कि नहीं मिल रहा है. तो एक ये भी कारण है. सबसे बड़ी बात यह है कि आम आदमी के बीच में जो उदासीनता है, क्योंकि देखिए जब तक कंप्लेंट्स नहीं आएंगी, जब तक उस ढंग से लोग जागरूक नहीं रहेंगे, और जिस अखबार हो या टीवी चैनल हो या इवन स्टेचुरी बॉडीज हैं, उनके बारे में भी लोगों को कहीं ना कहीं अपना एक्सप्रेस करना चाहिए, एक्सप्रेस करना चाहिए. अगर कंप्लेंट लगती है तो उसके खिलाफ भी करना चाहिए, बताना चाहिए कि भाई ये नहीं किया. कम से कम चिट्ठियां आए, लोगों के पास आए, लोग बताए तो सही कि हाँ जी हम आपके इस फैसले से दुखी हैं, या आपने इस मामले में क्यों नहीं एक्शन लिया. तो ये जरूर है. लेकिन वही सबसे बड़ी बात यही है कि सेल्फ रेगुलेटरी बॉडीज को एक तो उसमें ऐसे लोग आए जो उस काम को कर सकें, जिस काम का उसका जो प्रिंसिपल ये है, मोटिव है, उस मोटिव को पूरा करने के लिए आए, और फिर उसको कुछ पावर्स और प्रोमलगेट हो ताकि वो उसको एक्ट भी कर सके. ये बहुत जरूरी है, चाहे वो इलेक्ट्रॉनिक चैनल्स के लिए हो, चाहे वो प्रिंट मीडिया के लिए हो या डिजिटल मीडिया के लिए हो. अगर एक संगठन बनता है तो बहुत बड़ी बात हो जाएगी, क्योंकि इतना विस्तार हुआ है इलेक्ट्रॉनिक मीडिया का या डिजिटल मीडिया का या सोशल मीडिया का, और फिर प्रिंट मीडिया का भी. उसको लेकर के बहुत बड़ा एक इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर उसके लिए भी जरूरत पड़ेगी, और पता नहीं कैसे करेंगे लोग, क्या करेंगे, समझ में नहीं आता.
जी, धन्य Kumar, if you would like to add something and also answer the second question.
Yeah, the whole question of implementation, compliance, and so on, it's a tough one, because if you invest any of these bodies with any kind of statutory power, there's a risk of it being misused. Now, this new IT rules carries that logic of executive action to an extreme, because after the self-regulatory body and the industry level body, there's the executive power of the committee of secretaries that is invoked to ensure compliance by the social media and by the digital publishers with the whatever is the kind of whatever they judge to be in the public interest. Now, what is missing in this entire thing is, of course, the judicial process, because you need to have a considered process of judicial deliberation before you arrive at any kind of decision which impacts significantly on the right to free speech. So I spoke about precedent in the early part of my presentation here. Our precedents are very, very unclear. In terms of the news media, we don't have much of a kind of judicial, much of a body of jurisprudence to draw upon. But if you look at the kind of the visual media, the creative media, so to speak, you had this clause causing offense on grounds of identity. You know, for instance, that came up in a case involving a film on reservations. This was back in the 1970s, case of Rangarajan versus Jagjeevan Ram, it's called, in which the Supreme Court held that no, you assume that the audience is mature and, you know, of stable temperament and not quickly offended. You know, in a way, it was kind of reaffirming the slogan of the campaign against censorship, which is that free speech requires fearless listening. Free speech on one side becomes completely threatened if on the other side you have a hypersensitivity. You know, you need to have fearless listening, which gives the speaker a fair opportunity of being heard and does not deliberately, wantonly misinterpret what he has said and try to target him, right? But so that was a good kind of principle that the Supreme Court enunciated. But when it came to this movie, this recent movie on Mughal and Rajputs and so on, what is it called? Which had Deepika Padukone and so on, you know, at that time they said creative expression is very important, but also is public sentiment. So you know, so they kind of reversed that whole precedent. So you know, so it is very important that this is why I emphasized in the very first part of the session that we should look at that ruling of the NBSC and make sure that these the principles are distilled out, and that there's no going back on them, you know, because there's so much of back and forth movement in our regulatory system that we are completely lost. You know, it becomes a kind of complete thicket. Now, if you look at Press Council, now Jaishankar ji has been a member of the Press Council and all that, but I've attended some of their sessions and I have looked at some of their rulings. There's very little kind of citation of precedent. You know, every case is determined in seemingly on a fresh of a fresh kind of, you know, slate. And if you look at the code of ethics that has been drawn up by the Press Council, it's a vast body. It's really kind of, you know, multiple principles, and they just keep adding on and adding on and adding on things. And now the new IT rules try to give this code of ethics some kind of a statutory status. You know, so far it's not had statutory status. So now they're trying to give it a statutory status so that the, you know, the final executive power can be exercised on grounds of violation of this code of ethics. So, you know, so there is a threat of arbitrary action here, and that has to be firmly kind of contested. And of course, it's very important that the petitions by Digipub and so on are heard. And I was quite surprised to learn that even PTI, Press Trust of India, which normally is not a very litigious body, it is a very, very kind of, you know, compliant body, usually listens to all that the government says and so on. They also filed a petition saying that these rules are against the right to free speech. So one hopes that these will be heard and that they will be settled, and that, you know, as we go forward, we will kind of, you know, not depart from whatever sound principles are evolved in these cases. And after that, of course, the kind of sanctions that can be imposed for non-compliance can be thought about. Advertiser boycott is one thing, but sometimes sheer negative publicity is often a sufficient deterrent. You know, when people talk about it and say that, you know, their coverage was deemed to be you know, unethical and so on, that also is a deterrent to further repetition. It becomes difficult when you have highly polarized situation like now, where, you know, and they also use social media as a force multiplier. You know, if you look at the kind of hashtags that they promote, you know, and it's an organized effort. It's very clear from their tweets and so on. There's a kind of, you know, organized effort to promote certain kinds of themes and to target particular news platforms and to kind of uphold certain others as kind of embodiment of patriotic virtues. So becomes very difficult. So it requires a lot of strategic kind of calculations and a properly kind of thought through approach here.
Dhanya?
So, as I said, I mean, I agree with most of the views that have been put forward, but I mean, I keep thinking, what is the solution, right? Now, as far as digital media websites are concerned, we have to understand the numbers are quite overwhelming. And almost every day, there are new websites coming up in different languages, including English in India. In fact, when we started Digipub, we had around 20 members. When the IT rules came into force and everyone was told that you have to register, I think today we have 80 members almost, and we have got more applications from different people. And I can tell you that around 40 to 50% of these websites, I had never heard of them. And in fact, there are many websites which I keep asking colleagues also at Digipub in our core group. They've also not heard of these websites, but they are functioning. I don't know if they're run by journalists, non-journalists, what kind of journalism they do. So we do a cursory check of what kind of stories, etc., and then we allow membership. But the point is, there are too many websites. And I saw an interesting comment which was put on the chat box by Manavi, but I think it is from Daniel. So he says that how self-regulation going to help unless it is a long-term process where people with integrity choose to uphold it. I mean, I completely agree with you, which is why what everyone said here is very important. Look, we can have toothless organizations like the NBSA or whatever it is, and we can get orders from these organizations, but at the end of the day, if the channel or the newspaper is not going to abide by it, then what's the point? But I still think that it is worth pursuing, that it is worth going to organizations like the NBSA and de-incentivizing. Like Mr. Sukumar was saying that maybe negative publicity will deter them. Unfortunately, I at least think that news channels are beyond that now. I think for years we have been criticizing the way they're working, the kind of hate that they spew, but it didn't make any difference to them. In fact, they reached a crescendo when this whole COVID situation started and Tablighi Jamaat's name came up. So I don't think negative publicity is a problem that they face, because I sometimes feel many of them are politically also inclined that way. It's not just posturing for, so that there's revenue generation. Yes, hate gets you more eyeballs. In polarized India, people appreciate you more for taking on the other, whether it's Muslim or whoever it is. But I also believe that there is an inclination within most of these, at least amongst the top bosses of most of these organizations, and that can be fought only if we are more organized. For example, more campaigns like hate speech beta, and we have to continue to engage the self-regulatory bodies, or there is no solution to this, right? If self-regulation and self-censoring is not being followed by news organizations, let's say tomorrow the News Minute takes that form, and there has to be some way that we are held accountable, right? So I want to believe that these statutory bodies will work at some level and that we have to keep at it.
So the one question we have is it right to expect from, say, commercially minded organization to self-censorship if that is bringing incentive to them? You spoke about these, we can, campaigns can ask for defunding or de-advertising, but as an organization, you think which is very capital intensive to take this kind of steps?
No, but Mehtab, this is not some kind of field where you can do anything and everything simply because the market demands it, right? You are at the end of the day practicing journalism, and there is a purpose for that. I mean, you're not running a textile company or some Flipkart or Amazon where you keep changing how your site behaves or how your company behaves according to what the supply and demand chain is. That's not how journalism should function. So these news organizations have to be reminded time again that their entire purpose of existence is for journalism. And what is the purpose of journalism? So I don't agree with that at all. And look at the examples of the Hindu or the Indian Express. They're also legacy media organizations, and they try never to cross that line, right? And they also do generate money. They generate revenue. So it's not like these channels have to go this particular way to make money. It's the way they have chosen because it's an easy way out. So they have to be told that's not acceptable.
Yeah. So certainly Indian Express can be one example, But if we look at in terms of reach, Indian Express is way behind. So in Delhi, it does not come under, say, top 10 newspapers. So what about Times of India, Hindustan Times, or say in Hindi, Dainik Jagran, Dainik Bhaskar, or say they have Times Group, they have language newspapers. So that is who will, and they are very clear that they are into the in business because of the advertisement or the other things, and they have stated it time and again, especially Times of India and Hindustan Times. So what is the solution for that? And similarly, TV channels.
You want me to answer that, or would Mr.
Yeah. If you can answer,
So,
and then also Sukumar.
see, one of the main problems which ail the media in India, whether it's a television or print, whichever ones are ailing, I'm saying, and digital has been trying to stay away from it, is the revenue model. How the industry itself works, whether it's print or television, largely dependent on government ads, on ads from big multinational companies, etc. So there are a lot of compulsions which these organizations come under. I understand that many of the print organizations are trying to move away from it. For example, in the last 2-3 years, you've seen the Hindu, the New Indian Express, Times of India, Economic Times, Business Standard, all of them trying to move behind paywall, subscription, asking readers to pay. So they've understood that there has to be a separate revenue model. Now, hopefully, if that revenue model becomes a good, sustainable one, their compulsions will decrease. I don't know, or whether they'll just want to make profit and they continue the same way as they are. But as I can speak about digital, most digital organizations like The Wire, News Laundry, Scroll, we started only last year. The others have been doing it for many years. We are now turning to the readers. We are telling readers to pay because we've realized that that's the only way to really sustain and survive without coming under any sort of external pressure. So I think in India, all media organizations are trying, at least print and digital are definitely trying to move away from your traditional revenue sources. Because in one way, if that is what is pulling you down, if those market realities are what is making you what you are, then I believe a conscious effort is at least being taken by a few print houses. But television, I don't think there is any solution, because I don't think anyone is going to, any television channel is going to start a paywall saying you subscribe to my channel and you come here. And I don't think people will pay also. Therefore, there is absolutely no cure for the hatred which television spreads. The only way is to basically sensitize from your trainee journalist, your editors. And if that does not work, you have to de-incentivize them, which is either by going to a self-regulatory committee or by making sure that advertisers pull out, or finally shaming them. Shaming, we have tried quite a bit, I think. I don't know if it's worked. So there are different things that we have to do, but we have to keep at it, because television does have a huge impact on how people feel, how people react, and how people perceive things. So organizations like Hate Speech Beta have a huge responsibility on them. It's really not pretty, but sadly, it is the reality.
Sukumar, would you like to add something?
Yeah, the advertisement model, of course, has been responsible for much of the corrosion of ethical values in the media, because right from the start, I think the Indian media industry made very, very poor strategic choices by backing the advertisement horse rather than the readership loyalty, the audience subscription kind of model. Nowhere else in the world do you have this. And this is Dhanya was just talking about television. It's especially acute in the television media, because what do you pay for any of these news channels? There's absolutely nothing. Whatever you pay the cable operator, it goes to the whatever you pay your DTH service or your cable operator goes mostly to the carriage function, not to content generation. Nobody knows where it is financed from. It's comes out of advertising, obviously, but there's not enough to go around. So the competition for a shrinking pool of advertising is really very, very bitter in that domain. And this is what makes self-regulation such a contradictory thing, because when the competition between them is so intense, how are they going to come together on a single platform and agree on a set of principles? No? Because everybody's looking out for himself. No? So look at Republic TV or Times Now or so on. They obviously see a kind of some kind of benefit from peddling the sort of things they do, and that is because there is perhaps a certain demographic strata within this country that is responsive to that kind of message, and that strata is also of value to the advertiser. I often say the media is not dispensing with information. The media is selling attention. The media is selling the attention of the audience to the advertiser, right? So that seems to be the kind of dynamic at work here, that somehow the advertisers find that this very voluble strata, politically voluble, resentful, angry middle class, is responsive to that kind of a message, and that if we want them to see our kind of advertising message, this is the best platform to advertise on. So last year, I think some groups did start this Stop Funding the Hate campaign, and some companies, I think Bajaj probably, responded to it and said, yes, we're not going to give any advertisements to this particular channel because because of the kind of content that they broadcast. It is worth trying. It's worth trying, but the problem there is that it can be used by the other side also. It can be used by the other side to throttle the real kind of reporting. Now, the situation we are in now is such that the channels and newspapers that try to stay ethical and try to report in the public interest are already at rock bottom in terms of advertiser support and in terms of political kind of backing. They are already in a pretty precarious situation. So whether they can get any worse is not clear. So they have nothing to lose. So they could, they can't be hurt any further. So what we could do with this kind of advertiser boycott campaigns is to go for the platforms that are broadcasting hateful stuff.
Before I go to Jaishankar ji, if you have any question, you can post your question in the chat box. जयशंकर जी, आप कुछ ऐड करना चाहेंगे इस पर?
नहीं, सबसे बड़ी बात यह है कि देखिए, जो प्रिंट मीडिया हो या इलेक्ट्रॉनिक चैनल्स हैं, उनका मोटिव क्या है, वो क्यों चैनल चला रहे हैं, वो क्यों अखबार निकाल रहे हैं। तो आप देखिए, टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया के मालिक ने एक बयान दिया था, समीर जंग ने उस समय, कि साहब हमारा मोटिव कोई पब्लिक वेलफेयर नहीं है, हमारा न्यूज़पेपर जो है वो जस्ट लाइक ए प्रोडक्ट, जैसे वो कोई चाय है या बूट पॉलिश है, उसी तरह का एक अखबार भी है। तो हमारा मोटिव तो पैसा बनाना है, पैसा कमाने के लिए हम कुछ भी करेंगे। तो जहां ये मोटिव हो वहां और क्या हो सकता है। और दूसरी तरफ ये है कि जितने अखबार हैं या जितने भी चैनल्स हैं, उनके जो विज्ञापन दाता आज की तारीख में सबसे बड़ा कौन है, गवर्नमेंट है, सरकारी विज्ञापन है। तो सरकार उनको कंट्रोल करती है। फिर इसके अलावे भी जितने हमारे मीडिया हाउसेज हैं, अब इनके बहुत सारी दुखती रगें हैं, मतलब जो कमजोर नस्ल जिसको कहते हैं, हम बोलते हैं। अब आप देखिए कि दिल्ली में जितने बड़े अखबार हैं, चाहे वो हिंदुस्तान टाइम्स हो, चाहे टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया हो या कोई भी हो, इन सारे लोगों ने अखबार का काम छोड़ करके बाकी सारा काम कर दिया। स्टेट्समैन है, पूरी बिल्डिंग बना ली, बहुत बड़ी बिल्डिंग बना ली, उसमें अखबार का स्पेस एक बाथरूम से बराबर भी नहीं होगा और सारा किराए पर उठा दिया। तो कायदे से वहां पे प्रिंटिंग प्रेस, हिंदुस्तान टाइम्स में प्रिंटिंग प्रेस होता था, टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया में बहादुर शाह जफर मार्ग पे प्रिंटिंग प्रेस होता था, उन्होंने हटा करके ले जाकर के साहिबाबाद में कर दिया, इन्होंने नोएडा में कर दिया, और वो पूरी की पूरी बिल्डिंग जो है किराए पर उठा दी। हिंदुस्तान टाइम्स का एक फ्लोर भी आज मुश्किल से, एक फ्लोर का कुछ हिस्सा होगा जो अखबार के नाम पर रहा होगा। तो ये सारी चीजें चूंकि वायलेशंस भी करते हैं, तो गवर्नमेंट जानती है तो आराम से इनकी नस को दबा सकती है। अब दूसरा सवाल ये है कि जो हेट पे कैसे किया जाए, हेट जो बढ़ावा दिया जा रहा है उस पर कंट्रोल करने के लिए। अब सबसे बड़ी बात तो ये है कि जो सेल्फ रेगुलेटरी बॉडी है, जैसे मैंने शुरू में ही कहा कि उनको थोड़ी मजबूती देनी होगी, उनको ताकत देनी होगी और ऑटोनॉमस बनाना होगा, उनको उनकी स्वायत्तता को बढ़ाना होगा, उनकी गवर्नमेंट पे या किसी और संस्था पे डिपेंडेंसी को कम करना होगा। और जब स्वायत्त होंगे और मजबूत होंगे तो फिर शायद वो कुछ और काम कर सकेंगे, चाहे वो एनबीएसए हो या फिर प्रेस काउंसिल हो या कुछ और कोई मीडिया काउंसिल, कुछ जो भी बने उसमें भी देखना होगा। तो आप देखिए कि सरकार का जो रवैया होता है, अब सुदर्शन न्यूज चैनल जो है, अब उसके कोई भी उसका दिन नहीं है जिस दिन उसको बैन न किया जाए, कोई भी उसका कार्यक्रम नहीं है जिसको देखने के बाद नहीं लगे कि साहब अब इस चैनल को बैन कर देना चाहिए। लेकिन आज तक तो कभी नहीं हुआ, उसके बारे में आज तक हमको नहीं लगता कि कोई एनबीएसए का भी उस ढंग का कोई स्ट्रिक्ट एक्शन हुआ हो, या इस तरह के बहुत सारे लोग लगातार जिस ढंग की चीजें दिखा रहे हैं, जिस तरह की चीजें छाप रहे हैं। दैनिक जागरण के बारे में जैसे आपने नाम ले ही लिया था, तो दैनिक जागरण आज क्या कर रहा है, मैं आपसे बताऊं कि बहुत पहले दैनिक जागरण के मालिक ने एक पत्र लिखा था अपने सारे संपादकों को कि अब पाठकों की रुचि हिंसा, बलात्कार, डकैती, हत्या जैसी खबरों में ज्यादा होने लगी, तो कृपा करके इस तरह की खबरों को बढ़ा चढ़ा करके पेश किया जाए, ये हमारा मोटिव हो गया। तो इस तरह का जो बनाया गया कि हमारा कैसे अखबार ज्यादा बिकेगा, कैसे हमारा चैनल ज्यादा दिखाई देगा और ज्यादा उस पर टीआरपी होगी, जैसे पैसे कहाँ से आएंगे, इससे बचत का एक ही उपाय हो सकता है कि पब्लिक में अवेयरनेस आए। जैसे एडवर्टाइजर्स में भी है, अब हमारे यहाँ देश में तो मुश्किल है कि जैसे मान लीजिए राहुल बजाज थोड़ा दम काठी के आदमी है, फ्रीडम मूवमेंट से उनके परिवार का लेना देना रहा है, जमनालाल बजाज जी से लेकर के, तो वो लोग तो थोड़ा स्टैंड ले सकते हैं। लेकिन बाकी कितने एडवर्टाइजर्स हैं जो स्टैंड लेंगे, गवर्नमेंट से कहलवा देंगे कि भाई इनको विज्ञापन दिला दो, अर्नब गोस्वामी के चैनल को विज्ञापन दिला दो या इस अखबार को विज्ञापन दिला दो, तो करेंगे, मजबूरी हो जाएगी उनके देने के लिए, क्योंकि कहीं ना कहीं से सब कुछ संचालित करती है सरकार। और सरकार का जो मकसद है वो अपने राजनीतिक फायदों के लिए चैनल हो या अखबार हो, उसका कितना अधिक से अधिक इस्तेमाल कर सकता है। अब जैसे बीच में किसी ने बताया कि वो टेलीग्राफ की बात की, टेलीग्राफ जिस ढंग का जर्नलिज्म कर रहा है, लेकिन टेलीग्राफ का जो सहोदर भाई है वो एबीपी न्यूज, वो क्या कर रहा है, एक ही हाउस से दोनों चल रहा है ना। अब एक सरकार, अरूप सरकार की कंपनी है आनंद बाजार पत्रिका, जिसके साथ मैं 10 साल तक जुड़ा रहा हूँ, रविवार में जब छपती थी मैं उसमें काम करता था, तो उस हाउस का एक हिस्सा जो है वो न्यूट्रलिटी के साथ थोड़ा एंटी स्टेब्लिशमेंट पोस्टर लेता है, लेकिन दूसरा उसका जो टीवी चैनल है वो एक अलग ले लेता है, तो मतलब कहीं ना कहीं इससे बैलेंस करने की बात भी हो सकती है। तो बेसिक चीज यही है कि पब्लिक अवेयर हो, चैनल्स का बाइकाट करना शुरू करे, सोशल मीडिया पे बाइकाट करना शुरू कर दे, एडवर्टाइजर्स को भी लगे कि साहब अब इसका व्यूअरशिप घट रहा है, अब व्यूअरशिप का भी कैसे फैसला करेंगे आप, टीआरपी जो तय करने वाली संस्था है, आज तक तो जयशंकर गुप्त के पास नहीं आई कभी पता करने के लिए कि साहब आप कौन सा टीवी देखते हैं, कौन सा टीवी नहीं देखते हैं। उसके कुछ कुछ इलाके हैं वहां से जो करके ऑपरेट करते हैं, उसको भी मैनेज करने का केस सभी अर्नब गोस्वामी पे चल रहा है, तो उसको भी आप मैनेज कर सकते हैं, आराम से कर सकते हैं। तो कहीं ना कहीं अगर सरकार की रुचि बने, सरकार तो चाहेगी ही नहीं, सरकार को तो किसी लेवल पर भी बस उसका माउथ पीस चाहिए। अब आप सोच सकते हैं कि यूएपीए जैसा कानून किसी जर्नलिस्ट पे लग जाए, कोई जर्नलिस्ट अगर असहमति व्यक्त करता है, या कोई मान लीजिए राजनीतिक कार्यकर्ता भी, सामाजिक कार्यकर्ता भी अगर असहमति व्यक्त करता है, उसको आप राजद्रोह का उस पर मुकदमा सेडिशन का केस चला देंगे आप। तो ये जिस ढंग की रवैया चल रहा है, या कहीं ना कहीं एक फांसीवादी मनोवृत्ति है, फास्टिस्ट रवैया होगा। अब इसके लिए जो मुनासिब हो सकता है मीडिया, वो उनको चाहिए, वो उसको प्रमोट कर रहे हैं। तो जब तक कि पब्लिक में थोड़ी जागरूकता नहीं बढ़ेगी, लोग इसके लिए, चाहे अखबारों में, मैंने जैसे शुरू में ही कहा कि लोग लेटर टू एडिटर लिखना बंद कर दिया। हम लोग उस समय जब हम पाठक होते थे 70 के जमाने में, तो हम लोग अखबारों की होली जलाते थे, चौराहे पे लेके अखबार जलाते थे कि देखो ये आज अखबार है, इसने ये काम किया है, या ये जागरण अखबार है या फला अखबार। हम किसी का नाम उस ढंग से नहीं करना चाहते हैं, लेकिन अखबारों की होली जलाते थे लोग, बाइकाट करते थे, या फिर अखबार के दफ्तर पे जाके प्रदर्शन करते थे कि भाई आपने ये गलत खबर दिखा दी है, गलत खबर चलाई है। तो आज वो कमी दिखाई दे रही है, लोग उदासीन हो रहे हैं, पता नहीं क्यों उदासीन हो रहे हैं, ये सोचने की बात हो सकती है। तो मुख्य रूप से जो बात कहना चाहता हूं मैं कि एक तो पब्लिक में अवेयरनेस होना चाहिए, जागरूकता बढ़नी चाहिए। दूसरा, जो रेगुलेटरी बॉडीज हैं, जो ऑटोनोमस बॉडीज हैं, उनकी स्वायत्तता में वृद्धि होनी चाहिए, उनको मजबूत बनाना चाहिए, और उनको कुछ एग्जीक्यूटिव पावर्स भी मिलने चाहिए। जैसे एनबीएसए की बात की मैंने, तो एनबीएसए के जो फैसले हैं वो लागू होना मैंडेटरी होना चाहिए, और जो एनबीए के आप मेंबर हैं, मान लीजिए अगर उसमें है, तो आप उसको छोड़ करके इस फैसले का अमल नहीं करना चाहिए, इसलिए आप छोड़ करके अलग हो जाएगा। इस पर भी रोक लगनी चाहिए। इस तरह का कोई मैकेनिज्म जब तक नहीं बनेगा तब तक ये होगा, और जब तक ये फायदा पहुंचाएगा हमारी पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम को, हमारे सरकारों को, तब तक वो लोग इस तरफ से कोई ज्यादा ध्यान देने वाले नहीं। जी मेहता
जी, so Sukumar and Dhanya, what I would like to ask that do you think that self-regulatory bodies and statutory bodies should be strengthened? If yes, what should be the way forward? Like Jaishankar ji listed few things. So if you would like to say first, if you agree that these bodies should be strengthened further, they should be given say executive power or power to implement their orders. And then if yes, then what should be? I mean, 2-3 things you think should be done.
Well, I think the first step should, of course, be to evolve an agreed set of principles and to actually see how those principles work in practice, because often there's a big gap between the written code of ethics and the way it is understood. We've had so many codes of ethics written for the media since independence. The Newspaper Editors Conference, the Editors Guild, the various journalists' union, they've all done their bit. But there's just no compliance with any of it at this time. So that's because of the weakness of when we talk about implementation, we should first focus upon interpretation, because there's a big gap between the writing of ethics and the interpretation of the ethics in different kinds of situations. There are all kinds of pressures that come to bear, and that often leads to some media outlets getting a free pass, whereas others get kind of censured. So those kind of things should be avoided. So there should be a credible body, which is a standing body, which has continuity, institutional continuity, and can kind of can refer back. It should not be as if it's coming out with new rules and principles in every situation. They should refer back, quote precedent, and those sort of things. There should be a certain degree of rigor and due diligence in that process, and then I think we can think about the implementation aspect of it. My worry at this time is that when you're talking about implementation, a self-regulatory body by definition is a voluntary association. It's a voluntary association, so you can't have any kind of powers of compulsion that are invested in this body, right? So that becomes a little bit of a contradiction. At most, it can impose fines and so on, but even those fines, those guys can just say that we're just not going to pay up and just walk out of the body, right? So there must be firstly some benefit from being a member of that body, which is that you have certain collective interests which you project in the public arena, right? And there should also be certain kind of discipline involved in terms of the code of ethics that you are subjecting yourself to. So I'm afraid I'm speaking great generalities because the situation is still very, very basic, still very inchoate, still very unformed. So we need to really start building this from the foundations up. It's not as if we've got something there which you can use for going straight into the implementation phase. That is not there. That's what I'm trying to be very, very cautious here.
Dhanya?
I agree with Mr. Sukumar that self-regulatory committees themselves play only a very limited role, but I don't see what we can do beyond that. Now, if we go beyond that, then we will be talking about government control, which is exactly what we do not want, whether it's this government, the next government, or any other government. So we will have to make do with the self-regulatory committees, but perhaps in a more efficient way. Think of ways in which organizations which come under a particular association are liable, that the self-regulatory committee has some sort of power. But again, this is all very problematic now. Like I said, Digipub is one association with 75 members. Arnab Goswami, Nupur of Op India have their own association, their own self-regulatory committee. Therefore, any complaints on their websites go to their committee. So how is their committee going to behave? We don't know. How is our committee going to behave? We don't know. I mean, one can be a liberal committee, one is a conservative committee. So I'm not exactly sure how this will work going forward. But one thing I do know is that the code of ethics, which has been proposed now for digital, has to be completely rewritten, has to be completely redone, simply because some of the definitions which the government has are very problematic. Like the government says, any content which is against national interest can be something which people can raise a grievance against, and then it can be decided upon by the government whether it is against national interest. Now, I, as a journalist, am asking you, if, for example, Disha Ravi is arrested in Delhi, and I write an article saying toolkits are democratic, there is nothing to arrest Disha Ravi for, do I become a journalist or an organization who works against the national interest? So these are very, very problematic definitions which the government is trying to bring in the code of ethics. So I'm all for a code of ethics which is drawn by, let's say, Digipub or its self-regulatory committee, and the members abide by it. And we make sure that that regulatory committee has some powers, and all the members do follow. I mean, if they're asked to apologize or if they're asked to pay a fine, that they have to abide by those rules. Beyond that, if we try to go, we will end up in what the government proposes, like the IT rules.
Yeah, the national interest, of course, is a very undefined thing. And then, of course, there are phrases like promoting snobbish attitude and so on, which are, this is precisely the reason why the Supreme Court held that Article 66A of the IT Act is unconstitutional, because it defined offenses in such a broad fashion that the police could do just about anything they wanted. They could just causing offense, causing this, that, nuisance, this, such a undefined kind of set of offenses that the virtually a free hand available to any petitioner. Now anybody could go to the police station, file an FIR, and if the FIR happened to be kind of consistent with the interests of whoever was in power at that time, as you saw with the arrest of two young girls in Bombay because they said, why shut down the city for Bal Thackeray's funeral, right? They were arrested just because of that social media post. So because of that overbroad definition, the cops could do just about anything, right? And that's the reason why 66A was struck down. Now, the problem with the code of ethics that the government is now trying to force down the throats of digital media is precisely that. There are so many undefined terms there, and there is no precedent. No, there is no consistent body of rulings from either the press council or from the judiciary that you can look to when you want to define those terms. See, so that's why I say we need to start from the very, very bottom up, and we need to have a very, very clear-cut understanding of what is the public interest. Now, how far does the public interest go in ensuring freedom of speech and a free media?
Yeah. We have two more questions. So one question we have, just a second. So the one question we have is, do self-regulatory bodies now function full-time, or do they have only honorary members? How does the PCI, Press Council, and NBSA or Digipub work? Do they have full-time secretariat, or do they monitor news every day, or are they activated only when complaints are sent? So this is one question. The second question we have is, can putting a cap on funds received by the advertisers, including the government, can be a way forward? Is it possible for us to have some kind of regulation where citizens have to contribute to media, perhaps in a similar fashion, we pay taxes? So these two questions. And yeah, so you can answer.
I think the question on Digipub and the Press Council are, we have members of the two bodies here, right? So.
Yeah. जयशंकर जी, अगर आप थोड़ा बताएं कि ये जो प्रेस काउंसिल है उसके मेंबर्स ऑनरेडी होते हैं, मतलब स्ट्रक्चर क्या है, फुल टाइम काम करते हैं, कोई फुल टाइम सेक्रेटेरिएट होता है, या जब मतलब इस तरह थोड़ा सा उसके बारे में करते हैं?
नहीं, प्रेस काउंसिल का फुल टाइम सेक्रेटेरिएट है, क्योंकि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल बॉडी है ये सेमी ज्यूडिशियल क्वासी जुडिशियल बॉडी है, उसका बाकायदे बहुत बड़ा कार्यालय है यहाँ पे हमारे सूचना भवन में, और मेंबर्स जो होते हैं वो ऑलरेडी होते हैं, उनका जो सीटिंग होता है उसके हिसाब से उनको कुछ पेमेंट्स वगैरह होते हैं, तो लेकिन वो परमानेंट स्टाफ या उस ढंग से नहीं होते। लेकिन प्रेस काउंसिल का बहुत बड़ा स्टाफ है, सेक्रेटरीट है, चेयरमैन है, और जो सुप्रीम कोर्ट के एक्स जस्टिस होते हैं, फॉर्मर जस्टिस होते हैं, या एक सेक्रेटरी है, उसके नीचे भी कई ज्वाइंट सेक्रेटरी, अंडर सेक्रेटरी, स्पेशल सेक्रेटरी होते हैं, तो काफी बड़ा है डिपार्टमेंट है उनके, और वो लोग लगातार इस काम में लगे रहते हैं। जब भी कुछ आता है, जहां से भी आता है, तो जैसा मैंने कहा ना कि एक तो कंप्लेंट्स आती हैं लोगों की, तो उसको पहले तो चेयरमैन या उनका जो सेक्रेटरीट है खुद ही उसको देख करके एडुकेशन कर देता है उसमें कि भाई किसको लेना है, किसको नहीं लेना है, या किसमें हमारे पैरामीटर्स होते हैं, उस पैरामीटर्स में वो कंप्लेंट आती है कि नहीं आती है। तो अगर वो आती है तो फिर उसके बाद वो किसी न किसी जो 2 जांच समितियां होती हैं, उन जांच समितियों में से एक को दे दिया जाता है, तो वो उसकी सुनवाई करती है। और दूसरा होता है कि सुओ मोटो कॉग्निजेंस लेता है प्रेस काउंसिल, कभी भी कोई घटना होती है, जैसे कभी लगा कि प्रेस काउंसिल को इसमें एक्ट करना चाहिए, तो चेयरमैन खुद भी या हम लोग भी उसमें सुओ मोटो कॉग्निजेंस लेता है। तो इस तरह से प्रेस काउंसिल काम करता है। अब डिजिपब या ये जो एनबीएसए है, जैसे मैंने कहा कि इनको जब तक कोई एक मजबूती नहीं मिलेगी, कहीं ना कहीं संवैधानिक ये नहीं मिलेगा, तब तक ये लोग कैसे कर पाएंगे, जब तक उसको करने का कहीं ना कहीं तक कुछ तो होना चाहिए। तो वो तो अभी तक तो है कि वो सेल्फ ही है ना, उस ढंग से काम करने का है। तो बेसिक बात वही है कि ये तो अभी जैसे बात हो रही है, गवर्नमेंट पता नहीं कब तक करेगी, अपने हिसाब से करेगी, क्योंकि हम लोगों ने जो रिकमेंडेशन दिए हैं वो पता नहीं सरकार को कितना पसंद होंगे, नहीं मालूम है। लेकिन एक जैसे मीडिया काउंसिल बनाने की बात हो रही है, या प्रेस काउंसिल को ही थोड़ा एक्सपेंड करके उसके अंदर में इलेक्ट्रॉनिक मीडिया और ये जो डिजिटल मीडिया है, सोशल मीडिया को लाने की बात है, या तो प्रेस काउंसिल में लाइए या फिर मीडिया काउंसिल बना करके उसमें सबको एक साथ समाहित करके कोई ना कोई एक ऐसी बॉडी जरूर होना चाहिए जो जिसके प्रति लोगों की जवाबदेही और जो उसका काम जो है वो थोड़ा उसको मजबूती में है उसके साथ। तो मेरे ख्याल से तो मेन यही है।
जी, Dhanya, would you like to say
So,
the functioning of?
Yeah, Digipub was formed only last year. I mean, we had been discussing for many years, and finally we formed only last year. As of now, we have 11 members who started, which are your core members, the foundation members, and the rest of them have to pay an annual fee, whether it's an independent journalist, like we allow independent journalists also to join, and organizations. Our only rule is that we have a couple of rules, but the main one is that any organization that joins Digipub has to be a digital only organization. For example, the Caravan cannot be a part of the Digipub, at least as of now, because the Caravan runs a magazine. So all the people on Digipub are solely digital media organizations, but that need not be just websites. For example, Barkhadat and Faye or Akash Banerjee are part of Digipub. They all run YouTube channels. There are a couple of freelance journalists who simply write for digital media. So there's a membership fee. We have just started our account, in fact, last month. So we have started collecting the fee. And that's about it. And we formed a self-regulatory committee around 1 or 2 months ago. Former Justice Madan Lokur is heading it. And we are, of course, in the process of creating a code of ethics for Digipub members.
And do you have a full-time secretariat or?
We just hired a person. Because we didn't have a bank account, right? We didn't have any money to pay the person. So we just started the bank account. We hired a person. So yeah, there's one person secretariat, but we will have a secretariat properly. Maybe in the next 3 or 4 months, we will organize it. Also, because it's been the pandemic, it has been quite difficult to even arrange the meetings and make sure that, this is done. But anyway, we've got it up and running now, and we've got a lot of members. So hopefully things will settle down. But over the last few months, there has been a lot of concern amongst Digipub members, especially the smaller organizations, because you see what the government is mandating now is that everyone has to have a grievance officer. Like you must be reading on every day about how Twitter is having this constant fight with the government over not appointing a grievance officer. Today morning, they've appointed a grievance officer. So all of us also need to have a grievance officer. And then we need to constantly monitor if grievances are being sent to us, and the reply has to be sent within 15 days, I think. So it is a burden on most organizations, and there is a fear amongst most members that at some point these grievance redressal mechanisms are going to be used against them. So that has come up again and again in the Digipub meetings.
Yes. Manu, would you like to say a few things about the NBSA since you have petitioned? So just a functioning of the NBSA.
So the NBSA does have a permanent secretariat, and they don't as such monitor media, but if they internally, because if they are raised suo motu complaints, etc., they do take it up, but they're only on very specific issues. And actually, Mehta, I wanted to ask, since Opka come in now, in terms of if our panelists have, all three of them have looked at the recent cable television network amendment, the regulation amendment, which basically has made three layers, the same layer that Dhanya was mentioning in terms of the oversight committee, now extends to the NBSA as well as the PCI. So in that sense, the NBSA, not the PCI, because PCI is then a statutory body. So in terms of the NBSA, and now they've taken away the power of asking them to pay fines, which was previously with the NBSA. So how do we understand this shift? And even now, if they are being recognized as statutory body, it's come with this cost. So how do we see the way forward with this shift that's happened with the amendment?
Yeah, so Manasa, I was reading the cable TV amendment, and I think a couple of people have started speaking out against it. And there are, I read around 900 to 1,000 channels across India, which will now have to come under the Cable TV Amendment Act. And like you said, it's again trying to bring this oversight mechanism, the grievance redressal mechanism. So it's the same thing. The government wants to be in control of this oversight mechanism. First, they started digital, now they're extending to television, tomorrow it'll be print. See, one complaint which I really have is how the legacy media behaves. For example, when the government proposed, first initially there was a note which was sent around of what the IT rules will mandate. And I think within a few days time, we knew that we saw the gazetted notification, right? So the government held discussions with a few media houses. Though Digipub, for example, kept writing to the government, they never called us for discussion. They did call, I forget the organization's name, but it has got the Times of India, NDTV, Indian Express, and all these big guys. So Panorama, they all went for the meeting. And what they told the government is that, look, you can bring the IT rules, keep us away from it, because we are already under the Press Council of India Act and what the NBSA does. So our digital arm also will follow that. You only bring the digital media portals under your law. And they really thought the government is going to bend to their will, which is the reason why none of the big organizations ever spoke up when the IT bill was being talked about by various BJP ministers. And finally, they brought it. Initially, when the bill was brought in also, none of the big organizations spoke up because they thought they will be excluded. I think around 2 or 3 weeks ago, we got a notification from the government of India saying that the legacy organizations said that they should be exempted. The government has decided they will not be exempted. They also have to make the grievance redressal forum, which is when they decide to go to court. They've all gone to the Madras High Court, into all these newspapers and television channels. See, first thing, there is no unity within the media itself. The big legacy media thinks it's okay to just sacrifice some of these smaller websites like Scroll or Wire or the News Minute. It's fine. And I have kept insisting on meetings that unless we come together and say that we don't want a government oversight mechanism, this is not going to work out. Now, all the television channels who have been holding the government's flag all this while, how are they going to react to this? Are they also going to go to court now? So I think we need to have some understanding within the media itself, which we do not have as of now.
So I think we are running out of time. So it's already 1:47. We were supposed to have it till 1:15, 1:30. So I think at the end, if you have some last comments, Jaishankar ji.
Yeah, can I just say something on this matter of the question that Manvi just asked, which is that, the three kinds of media systems, media platforms, three different kinds of technological platforms, let's say, the print, the electronic, and the digital. There were inconsistent principles of regulation earlier. Now, print was supposedly covered by the press council, self-regulatory kind of quasi self-regulatory system. The visual media, especially cable and satellite television, they had serious problems deciding how best to regulate this. So the initial response, the mid 90s, when for a long while they just didn't do anything. They didn't know what to do about this boom in cable satellite broadcasting. The initial response was some form of intermediary liability to make the cable operator liable for the content that is broadcast, right? And then that's how it went on. And most of these big TV broadcasters were not very keen to take on the government, so they were being fairly kind of friendly towards the government and everything. 2008 was a key turning point with the Bombay incident, the terrorist attacks in Mumbai. The city was under siege, and all the channels were doing a kind of continuous kind of live coverage of this. And that's when certain things happened. They started seriously talking about regulating of content of broadcasters. And then the NBSA, I always said, is a kind of defensive response of the channels to kind of to keep the government off their backs. They said, okay, we'll come up with this. And they started off on a good foot. They started off with J.S. Verma as chairman and so on, a very, very eminent former Chief Justice and so on. And also Section 66 of the Information Technology Act, IT Act, was an act to promote e-commerce. It was not about regulating the digital media. No, Section 66 and 69A were written into the act after the Bombay terrorist attacks. Right? So this kind of controlling instinct comes into play at that time. And then what you had with the recent rules is, of course, that this third level of oversight, the executive agency, was decreed only for the digital media, and they had to establish consistency across all platforms. So now they made it applicable to the the digital print, that the hybrid and the kind of cable and the content of cable television, right? And you can be sure that it's not Times Now and Republic that will be held to censure by the executive committee. It'll be the other channels that do the the critical and more ethical kind of broadcasting.
Thank you, Sukumar. जयशंकर जी, आप कुछ आखिर में ऐड करना चाहेंगे?
नहीं, मैं यही ऐड करना चाहूंगा, जैसे मैं शुरू से ही कह रहा हूँ कि देखिए, सोशल मीडिया, डिजिटल मीडिया या इलेक्ट्रॉनिक टीवी चैनल्स के लिए भी जिस तरह से प्रेस काउंसिल है, उसी तरह का की बॉडी बननी चाहिए। जैसे मान लीजिए मीडिया काउंसिल बने, उसी के अंडर में सब आ जाए, या फिर अलग इन लोगों के लिए अलग-अलग से कोई एक बॉडी बने जिसकी एक कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल सैंक्शन हो, सैंक्टिटी हो, उसके हिसाब से वो काम करे, लेकिन उसमें ऑटोनॉमी उसको ज्यादा मिलनी चाहिए और ताकत उसको ज्यादा मिलनी चाहिए। उसके अलावा तो कोई बात बनने वाली नहीं है, मुझे लगता नहीं है। बाकी तो ठीक है, एनबीएसए अपना काम करेगा और डिजिपब भी करेगा, वो लोग करेंगे ही, लेकिन एक कहीं ना कहीं एक पार्टी होनी चाहिए जो काम करे। और सबसे बड़ी बात है कि इसको गवर्नमेंट के नियंत्रण से बाहर रखना होगा, गवर्नमेंट के कंट्रोल से बाहर रखना होगा, क्योंकि गवर्नमेंट अपने हिसाब से इसको चलाना चाहती है। आज की तारीख में 90% से ज्यादा का मीडिया जो है वो मतलब गवर्नमेंट का माउथ पीस के रूप में ही काम कर रहा है। और उसको प्रॉब्लम कहाँ हुई? जब तक ट्विटर या ये जो सोशल मीडिया के जो हैं, ये फोरम्स हैं, कि जब तक उनके पक्ष में काम कर रहे थे तब तक उसको दिक्कत नहीं हुई। लेकिन जिस दिन संबित पात्रा ने गलत टूल किट चलाया कांग्रेस का बता करके, और उसको ट्विटर ने कहा कि ये मैनिपुलेटेड है और उस पर किया, उसके बाद से गवर्नमेंट में खलबली मचनी शुरू हो गई, या रविशंकर प्रसाद को जैसे ये किया, तो उसके बाद से इन लोगों को लगा कि नहीं, अब इसको थोड़ा सा बाहर जा रहा है। क्योंकि कल तक जब किसी को पप्पू बना रहा था यही सोशल मीडिया, यही डिजिटल मीडिया, तब उनको कोई तकलीफ नहीं थी। लेकिन आज जब लग रहा है कि नहीं, अब उनके खिलाफ भी ये मामला चल सकता है, अब उनके खिलाफ भी, चूंकि ये फोटोशॉपिंग या इस तरह का जो चलाते हैं लोग, करते हैं, जब इनके भी होंगे तब तक तो उनको अब प्रॉब्लम होने लग गई। लगा कि नहीं, अब तो ये सोशल मीडिया हमारे ऊपर भी भारी पड़ सकता है, क्योंकि अखबार को कंट्रोल कर लेंगे आप, टीवी चैनल्स को कर लेंगे, सोशल मीडिया को नहीं कर पाएंगे। अब बाकी जितने जो अपोनेंट पार्टीज हैं वो लोग भी अपने हिसाब से अपना आईटी सेल या अपने लोगों को ट्रीट कर रहे हैं, तो अब उनको खतरा नजर आ रहा। तो किसी हालत में भी ये देखना होगा कि जो ऑटोनोमस बॉडीज हैं, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल बॉडीज हो, ऑटोनोमस बॉडीज हो, उनको और ऑटोनॉमी मिले, उनको और ताकत मिले, लेकिन गवर्नमेंट के कंट्रोल में नहीं देना चाहिए। और जैसा किसी हाईकोर्ट ने अभी कहा भी था ना कि भाई असहमति का अधिकार, असहमति के अधिकार को आप राजद्रोह से नहीं जोड़ सकते हैं, कि असहमति कोई व्यक्त करता है, मतलब डिसएग्रीमेंट होता है आपकी किसी बात से, तो अब सीए का कानून हो या किसान बिल है उसके खिलाफ अगर कोई अपनी राय व्यक्त करता है तो इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि राजद्रोह है। लेकिन लगातार ऐसे मामले हो रहे हैं। अभी हम लोग नॉर्थ ईस्ट गए थे प्रेस काउंसिल की एक टीम लेकर के, ऐसे तमाम जर्नलिस्टों को देखा जो सरकार के खिलाफ कोई ट्वीट कर दिया या सरकार के खिलाफ कुछ फेसबुक पर बोल दिया, उसके ऊपर सेडिशन का केस लगा दिए। तो इस तरह का मामला पूरे देश भर में हो रहा है। तो गवर्नमेंट को इससे थोड़ा सा दूर रखना होगा, ऑटोनॉमस बॉडीज को ज्यादा प्रोमिनेंस देनी होगी। सेल्फ रेगुलेशन हो तो बहुत अच्छी बात है, आमतौर पे हो नहीं पाता है, चाहे जो भी अखबार वाले हो। भाई टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया जैसा अखबार पहले एक ओम्बुड्समैन बनाता था, एक हमारे यहाँ एक जस्टिस होंगे जो ओम्बुड्समैन का काम करेंगे, लेकिन अब वो सिस्टम भी पूरी तरह से सक्सेसफुल नहीं हो पाया। तो कहीं ना कहीं जरूर एक ऐसा मैकेनिज्म बनना चाहिए जो रेगुलेट करे, जो देखे सही, फ्री एंड फेयर प्रेस मीडिया जो है उसको तो इंश्योर करे ही, लेकिन रेस्पॉन्सिबल मीडिया भी हो, रेस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी भी फिक्स करो, उसकी कोई जिम्मेदारी जवाबदेही भी बने, अकाउंटेबिलिटी भी बने, इसको इंश्योर करने का एक मैकेनिज्म जरूर होना चाहिए।
Thank you, Jaishankar ji. Thank you, Sukumar. Thank you, Dhanya. Now over to Manu.
Thank you, Mehtab. Also, thank you. I think after this discussion, we know one thing for a fact, that government control and oversight is not the solution. And we just have to evolve newer ways of thinking about self-regulation and about strengthening of self-regulation, and making this the people as a news consuming public much more rights oriented. So we will be taking all that forward from this discussion, and we want to thank everybody who joined in, as well as the speakers. And we also wanted to sort of put forward that if anybody is interested to join the campaign, we'll drop a link on the chat here for the Google form. And if anybody also wants to replicate these efforts in more localized context, we're very happy to support and be a part of it, because like everybody's told us that the only way forward is that we become a more aware news consuming public and hold these media channels and publications accountable. So thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the effort. Bye.
Now we can leave.
हाँ जी, शुक्रिया,
Thank you.
बहुत शुक्रिया, बहुत शुक्रिया।